to the extent that it transitions from being political to more of a religious struggle, that's I think a dangerous path that would lead us somewhere where third-party intervention becomes, I think, less effective.
Unless it's God.
Oh, well, yeah, unless he dictates a solution. And so third-party intervention can actually shape that eventuality, and it's also affected by it. There's also the issue of timing. It's always crucial for third parties to get the timing of their intervention right, but also to realize that timing, or time, is not on the side of both sides. And to paraphrase Shakespearean Macbeth, who said that sleep knits the raveled sleeve of care. In the case of this conflict, in my mind, neither sleep nor time will knit up the raveled sleeve of care, and it would only unravel it some more. So I think we need to move quickly because the clock is ticking. In thinking about the challenges facing third-party mediation over the coming period, the American administration, I would highlight maybe two main challenges that I see. One is the regional turbulence within the Arab world, as everyone has witnessed. There is a big transition going on, and it has acted, I think, as an inhibitor for extra third-party involvement and risk-taking. The third parties, whether they are the US, Europe, or the Arab states, are naturally preoccupied with other fires burning through the region, and that can divert attention and can divert energies. For the parties themselves, I think the Israelis have looked around in the last 2 years and have been worried by what they see happening in Syria, Egypt, and elsewhere, and the natural inclination has been to back off and say, well, let's see what happens after the dust settles, and then maybe we will move forward with negotiations. Our advice from our side, in terms of the Quartet representative and his office, has been to the Israelis that it's much better to get in now, to try to move with the Palestinians on a negotiation so that you lower the temperature in the region, and you also take this issue out of the local politics of the countries in the neighborhood. And as well that it is in the national strategic interest of the State of Israel to solve this conflict. The Palestinians too, on their part, I think have looked around and they've lost a big benefactor within the region, and that has also, I think, given them pause in terms of going ahead full force. The other challenge, I think, are the positions on final status. Gershon was talking about the issues, and I think there are serious differences in perception of what is fair and what is not fair. In my view, a final deal must include East Jerusalem and the Jordan Valley, based on 1967 with mutually agreed swaps. And the parameters, I think, are known. And that's what's a bit frustrating. I think working on this conflict, you see the end game. You see how it can be dealt with, but you can't get from A to B. In Northern Ireland, it's still not known whether it's a United Kingdom or United Ireland. But nonetheless, they were able to agree on a process that ended the conflict. And it certainly cannot be the solution based on what somebody called an ABG vision, which is, only area A and B and Gaza, and that's all that the Palestinians will get. It has to be A, B, C, including East Jerusalem, the Jordan Valley, Gaza, and that will be the only solution a Palestinian leader would be able to sign up to. Very briefly on the American initiative, I would end by pointing to 3 opportunities. I think the Americans are re-engaged. They're reaching out to all concerned parties, the Europeans and the Arabs, and trying to put together a new initiative. And the parties, I think, are willing to give the Americans some time, enough space and time to do this. And what's also good is that they want to move the 3 tracks together at the same time. So it'll be an integrated approach between politics, economics, and security. The economics will not substitute for the politics. I think the politics has to lead, and then both security and economics would support. And I would close by saying that there have been 4 Nobel Prizes given to American presidents over the last 110 years, and it is indeed my hope that the last Nobel Prize will come to symbolize efforts to resolve the current predicament that the Israelis and Palestinians find themselves in.
Thank you.
Not only efforts, but successes.
Success.
Yeah, I have a comment before I open the floor for questions, and that is related to the international or the third party role, and what incentives there are for them to continue to support or whatever, you know, because we're always listening, waiting for, we waited for Obama, we, followed, when is he gonna take this move, when is he gonna come, we're waiting for this party and that party. So what is it that's gonna sustain those efforts? And once there is an effort and things start to move, if there are breaches, again, unless they become somehow localized, they become the ownership of the two parties themselves, then I don't see that carrying through. So that's my comment, and you may comment on that later. And the floor is open for questions.
We've tired everyone out.
Angela.
I hope I'm not the only one asking questions. Dr. Ad, I'm curious to try to address also some of the failures of third state responsibility, because we talked a lot, or we heard a lot about some of the successes, some of the challenges, but speaking as a long time, not so long, but a peace activist, I think that the third state role has, without realizing and maybe without planning, and maybe we were lacking, but it has undermined or disempowered civil society. And now you have an almost neo-colonial system whereby local grassroots organizations, local human rights organizations are seriously weakened, so that when something like Bab el-Shams happens, everybody's like, oh wow, but they were not internationally funded, that came from Palestinian business. And the question is whether or not, in dealing with Israel as the traumatized child, giving it all of these, and I speak as an Israeli obviously, giving it all of these carrots and almost no sticks, when it's pretty obvious by now with the building of the settlements that Israel has not been in good faith for whatever reasons, but the dealing of that with that traumatized child by giving it carrots psychologically has actually been very faulty medicine. And I'm not suggesting amputation, although there are doctors who would say that. I'm suggesting leave the child alone. This is what psychologists have told me, somebody who used to lead the Norwegian socialist left, a retired psychologist who deals with traumatized victims, says that actually the international community has encouraged Israel to continue to build and to develop, because it has been funding all of the PA to the extent that it has now, disempowered Salam Fayyad, and is therefore a huge failure. And are we going in the right direction by continuing with those paradigms, albeit we don't necessarily have better ones? But I would suggest that empowering civil society to be more democratic on both sides would be in the long-term interest, instead of taking all of the power into the hands of, if it's the EU, it's not democratic. And certainly I don't think George Mitchell, Condoleezza Rice, Dennis Ross, all those people had a public behind them. I think that's more or less enough. I just want to say, what about Palestinian protection? Today 100 goats were taken by settlers in Al-Auja. Nobody can do anything about it. When I was asked to help, phone UNRWA. And she's on a plane going home for 10 days.
Yeah, anyone else? Here.
I have.
You introduce yourself.
Oh, sure, certainly. My name is Joyce Morin-Utes, and I am an American, and I'm a professor of law at Al-Quds Law School. And thank you for this very stimulating discussion. But I have a question, Dr. Baskin, about your argument for the Jewish minority in Palestine after, I would assume, a two-state solution, where you mentioned that they would need to have protection and so forth, and I would imagine that protection might include separate roads and, no, just protection. My concern about that is, how does that bode for the sovereignty of Palestine, and how does that bode going forward for reconciliation, and whether you see in this process, a hopeful process, that we would have to have truth and reconciliation or some other reconciliation that way between these hopeful states. How would you believe that should be done?
Yeah, they want to answer and then.
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I think as a matter of principle, we have to recognize that even when we come to terms with a two-state solution, and we have two sovereign states between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, both peoples believe and assert their belief that they have a right to it all. Historically, both sides can make the claim in terms of heritage as well. As a Jew, it's very easy for me to say that when I read the Bible, the Old Testament, the Torah, that is describing to me scenery which is not the beaches of Tel Aviv, but the hilltops and the valleys of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. That's my historical heritage land, the land of the prophets, etc. For me, it's illogical and wrong to imagine that someplace in the land of Israel, between the river and the sea, there could be a state in which it would be prohibited for Jews to live. For it to be what we use in the Nazi jargon, Judenrein, that in the land of Israel there should be a state where Jews could not be allowed to live. I think it's also important for Palestinian democracy that they learn to be able to deal with a national minority in their presence. I think that's good for democracy. I had a wonderful conversation once with Salam Fayyad, who advocates the position of a Jewish minority in a Palestinian state. And I suggested to him that the Palestinians should declare that the rights and privileges and obligations of the Jewish minority in the Palestinian state will be linked exactly to the rights and privileges and obligations of the Palestinian minority of the State of Israel. And I think that creates a basis for helping to achieve real equality between Jews and Palestinians in the State of Israel as well. I think it furthermore gives us a challenge, and this is a challenge which is necessary at the international level, to come to terms within a democratic nation state of what a national minority means. The State of Israel grants rights to individuals. It does not recognize the Palestinian minority in the State of Israel as a national minority having collective rights. And I think that we are challenged in this paradigm of having national minorities in both states to lead the world in dealing with the concept of a collective national minority within a nation-state framework. We're certainly not the only place in the world where these minorities exist, and I think that we have to be challenged to deal with it. So I think that it is a challenge that we need to take. It is part of the mechanism of creating trust and reconciliation as well, because we have to learn not only to live with each other as neighbors in separate states, but as neighbors where we're in the presence of each other every single day. When I talk about protection for them, I think it's something which is hopefully needed only in the short term in order to provide confidence and trust so that these people can live there as citizens, law-abiding Palestinian citizens in a Palestinian state, and knowing that they're not risking their lives by doing that. So again, I said that's the responsibility of the Palestinian state to provide that security, as they would have to provide for every single one of their citizens, including the Jewish citizens. But we're going to need some kind of third-party mechanism to help that process happen, to make sure that it's real, so that Israel is not abandoning its citizens behind. They might be dual citizens. There could be all different kind of models. But we need to ensure that they will be protected in some way. Separate roads and that kind of thing is not part of my vocabulary.
I'll comment on two questions. There was one about examples of failure or where third-party involvement hasn't been effective, and there was a comment then about, I think, the U.S. and leaving the child alone as tough medicine. Regarding failure, I would point to maybe one aspect which I think is very, very important. I think given where we have come from over the last 20 years since the Oslo process started, there is really a rejection now of anything related to ad hocery or an interim phase to negotiation. I think psychologically the Palestinians need to see where they're going, what their state would look like at the end of the day, and Israelis need to feel secure at the end of the day. They don't want to get into a situation, as Gershon said, where the West Bank becomes a hothouse or a warehouse for weapons. And I would suggest that over the next year or two or even longer, what is needed is a sustained, the format of sustained symmetry, where high-level representation comes in and imposes upon the Israelis and Palestinians a willingness to negotiate all final status details up front. So you negotiate everything up front, however long it takes, but the implementation could take 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, however long it takes. But so long as the Palestinians know what they're getting, and the Israelis know at the end of each year there is a security review where their security is assured by the third party and all parties, and then we can resolve this conflict. In terms of leaving the child alone, there was an interesting discussion that was reported between Condoleezza Rice and a British MP, I think, in London, and I think it was last year. And the British MP was basically telling the former Secretary of State, why doesn't the US get a little bit tougher with Israel, and to basically say that it's not in your short, medium, long-term interest to continue the settlement expansion project. And her line back was, well, friends, don't impose costs upon friends. But I thought the retort by the member of Parliament was quite clever. He said, well, family members do. And when you see a family member not really behaving in his or her interest, then you would sort of impose a cost, but as a family member and somebody who's close. And I think the danger, if the third party, and that is the US, in 2013 or 2014, really doesn't feel anymore that the parties are serious themselves at resolving this, then I think eventually, invariably, that third party will walk away. And it won't disengage fully, but effectively it would disengage. And I think that wouldn't be the optimal situation for Palestinians, Israelis, and the region, because I think you need that kind of sustained engagement.
We have a question. And
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Sheikh Ibrahim, present yourself.
My name is Ibrahim Abdullah from Mount Olives. I just want to ask one question. Who decided to take the name of Palestine from the map of the world? Because all the map in the world, there is no one word called Palestine. Who decide and how they deal with it agree about it. You understand? I am not citizen of any country. I know by birth I am Palestinian. By law I am nothing. Who did decide to take the name of my country from the map of the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Twite from IPCRI. I want to ask my question following what the last speaker from the platform said about the positive aspects of third-party intervention. I mean, when you look at it, the feebleness of the European Union, successive senior politicians come here, they remonstrate with Israel, they don't like it, they say it's very wicked, they don't do anything. I know in American politics the situation is desperately complicated because the American Senate believes that Israel is always right. Well, it's a kind of problem because they're not. Now, I want to ask you, what about the positive aspects of intervention? What about pressure that can be put on the sides when they breach not only formal obligations made 20 years ago or 15 years ago, but actual human rights breaches of different sorts? I mean, look, when you look at it carefully, the problem here is about Israel. The policy of Israel has to be changed if there is any hope of peace. While the settlements still advance, no Palestinian politician can actually sign up to anything, because there it is. So shouldn't we be encouraging third parties to take as positive a role as they can to bang the two sides together? I don't at all believe in leaving them alone, like children who find their own situation.
Until they want you.
Well, I think that I don't think it matters whether they want to or not. This thing is like an abscess in the tooth of the world. Nobody quite knows what will happen to it, but it can actually do enormous damage, not only to the people here, but also to all those around about, even as far away as America or even China. I'd also like to suggest, it's a sort of stupid idea really, but if we are now in a situation where China, India, Japan play a larger part on the international scene, why not get them to think? China has no connection really with Israel, and very little with the Palestinians. Get them to join some mediation effort. Get people who have not got a history here to come in and play a part. Thank you.
Take it away.
Hi, my rhetoric question is that in every meeting like this, I'm very feel pain because most of the participants here are foreigners. I mean, I love foreigners. They would expect that it would be about 45% what is called Israeli from Jewish origin and another 45% Palestinians and Arab origin. And maybe 10% there will be most welcome to be foreigners. But here I'm afraid most of the people, and they're very welcome, are not know this and neither that party. And this I feel, I'm asking why. This is just a rhetorical
Just out of curiosity, how many Israelis and Palestinians are in the room?
I'm not.
Well,
You're Palestinian.
not really. I mean, these people are very welcome, but they are not, I mean, Israelis or Palestinians. I mean, they raise their hand and it's okay, but they are
You're
not.
right. This typically happens when the lecture is in English, and we have made an effort to make the lecture in Hebrew. We had one in Kiryat Shmona, and that was a different deal. And that's what we hope to also do in Palestine. To that those won't be joined, but
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Should we take those three questions?
I'm afraid it's not rhetorical. The situation with the sorry. Oh, I'm Zach. I'm from London. And the situation at the moment, post-Obama visit, very interesting trying to get the negotiations back on track. But the current situation with the Gaza Strip, I'm sure President Abbas was not going to relinquish legitimacy for all the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. How does a third party get involved when the red lines of Hamas are well, for the moment anyway, seemingly the long-term non-existence of the State of Israel, and the Red Lines of Israel, the non-existence, I assume, of a terrorist group that wants to destroy Israel, should I say. Your comparison, Dr. Baskin, was very interesting with your negotiations with the Hamas Deputy Prime Minister. But at the same time, in an existential crisis, in terms of the existence of both sides, can a whole resolution be decided upon when part of the Palestinian people live under a different mentality, or the government?
You're the Hamas expert.
For me, the answer with regard to Gaza is very clear. Gaza is part of Palestine. We agreed that Gaza and the West Bank are one territorial unit. The Palestinian people, both Hamas and Fatah, the PLO, agree that President Abbas has the legitimacy to negotiate on behalf of all the Palestinian people. President Abbas has said that if he were to reach an agreement with Israel, he will bring it to a referendum of the Palestinian people. Hamas leadership has said that they will honor the results of a referendum brought to the Palestinian people. I'm not sure that they will or they won't, but I believe very strongly that an agreement between Israel and Palestine, which includes the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and is perceived as being fair by the majority of Palestinian people who would support it in a referendum. The agreement would also state that it will be implemented in Gaza only when the regime that controls Gaza agrees to the terms of the agreement. And under their situation, I believe quite strongly that the people living in Gaza will either force Hamas to accept the agreement or they will get rid of Hamas. What we've been doing over the last years has been systematically empowering the extremists at the expense of the moderates. We have empowered Hamas. We brought them essentially into power by failing to negotiate and coordinate the disengagement from Gaza with the representative leadership of the Palestinian people. And the message that we gave to the people of Palestine was that diplomacy and negotiations don't work. The only thing that works is muqawma, is resistance, which we call terrorism. If that's the message that the disengagement from Gaza gave to the people, in the same way that the unilateral withdrawal of Israel from southern Lebanon gave the same message to the people of Lebanon, who saw Hezbollah as being successful of getting rid of the occupation of southern Lebanon by Israel after 18 years of being there. It was only after hitting Israel that Israel left. Unfortunately, we continue to teach people that the only language Israel understands is the language of force, and it's time to reverse that and to show people that diplomacy and moderation works and agreements is the way to move forward. And I believe very strongly that once people break the barrier of fear and they have a reason to fight, they will do it. 40-year regime of a dictator in Tunisia was overcome in 3 weeks. A 30-year dictatorship regime in Egypt was overcome in 18 days. The people of Gaza are no different than the people in the West Bank. And an overwhelming majority of them, like the people in the West Bank, do not support Hamas and do not want to live under the regime of Hamas. And if they're given an opportunity for peace, for freedom, for dignity and prosperity, they will choose that. And they will force Hamas to either change or they will change Hamas.
Sorry.
2 quick comments about the suggestion maybe to bring in other third-party actors, China or others. In my experience, because I work for the Quartet, and that consists of Russia, the US, EU, and the UN, it's not the number of actors, I think, that either detract or add to the effectiveness of the third party, but it's more the issues themselves, because if you get 4 people into a room, it's hard enough to get consensus. If you expand it to get 10 people in the room and there has to be agreement between the parties, it becomes almost impossible. And there have been suggestions of bringing in the Turks, the Arab states, China, others, but at the end of the day, it becomes almost unmanageable as a third-party enterprise. There was a question by Sheikh Jalil about the map and so on, and I'm not sure who was responsible for the map, but I know that the existence of the Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem is really an intolerable situation, because in many ways, there is this twilight zone in which they live, where many of them have Jordanian passports, but they're not Jordanian. They are Palestinian, but they are disconnected from the West Bank because of the wall. They are subjected to Israeli laws, but they're not Israelis. And meanwhile, over the last 40 years, their living conditions have plummeted. There's a deep education crisis, a deep housing crisis. Unemployment and poverty are very high. And when somebody's family who's lived here for hundreds of years has to go and find employment elsewhere and stays out for an extended period of time, he loses his or her right to the city of his family. And that is fundamentally a huge problem. And I think a lot of work has to go in to raising the living conditions and empowering these residents of East Jerusalem pending a final status agreement.
We can take
two more
questions, yes.
I just have one question Sorry, I have one question for all of you. Again, Dr. Basky, you talked about Abbas saying he would take any agreement as a referendum to his people. With the current political structure of the Netanyahu government, and with Naftali Bennett's proposal to annex all of Jerusalem and Area C, and with the seats being distributed the way they are, tell me where the promise is that this government can come to any table.
Hello, my name is Carrie. I wondered, has anybody thought about one country for two peoples? And would that be a solution? Could that be a solution? I've spoken to students in Bearside, and well, I'm Norwegian, and they wondered if the Norwegians would support a one-state solution, because that was what they actually believed in.
Can you describe maybe why they're saying this?
Because the situation with the settlements, with the expansion of settlements, and yeah, it takes too much land from.
Yeah, I know, but what is their expectation of the one state? That's
well, they hope to live in peace. They want to live in peace, and their aim is to be able to live in their land with the Israelis, with the Jews, as one people, actually.
Both as a controversial.
Yes.
Both of these questions could be addressed in a very large way. I'll be very telegraphic. Starting with the so-called one-state solution. There's no such thing as a one-state solution, because if solution means end of conflict, there's no one-state end of conflict, because this is a conflict of two national groups who want a territorial expression of their identity. I am sure that if I sat with your students at Birzeit University and probed them a little bit about how they viewed that one state, essentially what they would be viewing is a Palestinian state. That's what it would translate into being, and my place for an expression of my identity in that one state would not really be there. Because it's a national conflict of two national movements over a piece of territory, the only solution for it is a two-state solution. We need to ensure that the two states live together in peace, and that there's cooperation across the borders, and that it's not a Berlin Wall between the two states. But if we want to end the conflict, we have to enable these two peoples to have a territorial expression of their identity, and then to help them to work together to create a real peaceful situation that could lead to other possibilities in the future, like confederation, etc. But confederations are agreements between sovereign states. That's where we need to get to. Palestinians also need self-determination. They are fighting for all these years a territorial expression of their identity. They want a piece of land they can call their own. And they deserve it, and they have a right for it. I think anyone who advocates a so-called one-state solution now is denying both the Jews and the Palestinians their right to self-determination. And I think it's not doable, and I think it won't work. Secondly, there is no possibility for either Abbas or Netanyahu to negotiate in public. Netanyahu cannot get a peace agreement through his government. Abbas cannot get a public negotiating process through his political maze that he has to go through every single day. The only way to move forward is in a secret negotiation between them, which produces an agreement. If an agreement is presented tomorrow to the Israeli Knesset, there's a majority in the Knesset. Netanyahu's government breaks apart immediately, but there is a majority in the Knesset for voting yes to that peace agreement. Not only that, from the votes that I've counted in the Knesset, there's even what's called, and I hate to use this term, but this is part of the Israeli political reality, there's even